everybody, welcome back to Medical Terminology. This week we are going to be talking about the integumentary and musculoskeletal systems. A couple of reminders before we get started. So I'll provide some context for your final test now, which will occur in week 14. So the final test will open up on April 21st, and it will remain available until April 22nd at 11:59 p.m. The test is about, I think, an hour and a half in duration or so. I'll post the specific details once we get closer to the final test, at least a couple of weeks out. You have about an hour and a half to complete it, and it'll be available for those 2 days. So from 9 a.m. on the 21st until 11:59 p.m. on the 22nd. So a reminder that it must be completed during this time window. Once you start the test, this starts the clock, and you must hit submit before the time limit. So be sure to hit submit, and also be sure that you receive that submission receipt indicating that the test was successfully submitted and showing the time that you submitted it. So be sure to receive that receipt and ensure that your test was successfully submitted for grading. Otherwise, for this week, you have an assignment that opened up today at 9 a.m. and it's due on Friday at 5 p.m. based on this lecture, so the integumentary and musculoskeletal system. So we'll go over questions and checkpoints and practice problems throughout this lecture that will help you to prepare for the assignment as well. Now, for learning objectives, we are going to identify the structures and layers of the integumentary system. The integumentary system includes the skin and accessory structures that support the functions of the skin. So we are going to discuss some of the anatomy and also the physiology or the functional aspects of the skin. And then, of course, we'll talk about some skin disorders and skin conditions and the pathophysiology behind them. Then we are going to follow the same flow for the musculoskeletal system. So we'll talk about a brief discussion on the anatomy. We'll talk about the structure in general of bones, muscles, distinguishing between tendons, ligaments, and cartilage, with a focus on the medical terms, right? So the combining forms for these specific structures to be able to recognize them in practice. And then we'll also talk about some pathologies. We've seen these words like arthritis, osteoporosis, osteoarthritis we've seen before, right? But we're going to talk more about some key characteristics of these conditions, symptoms, how they develop, and how they appear, and what they look like in the body as they occur. So we're going to start with the integumentary system. The skin, the accessory structures, and also the subcutaneous tissue or the hypodermis, the tissue that lies below the skin, wholly form the integumentary system. So this includes the skin itself, hair, nails, sweat glands, and oil glands. Although it's often thought of as just a covering of our body, this integumentary system has several critical functions that aid in homeostasis and supporting our internal environment in the body. So one of the first functions of the integumentary system is protection. So the skin acts as a physical barrier, of course, that protects the body from, any physical trauma, but also harmful microorganisms, like preventing bacteria and viruses from reaching our deeper tissues, such as our vital organs. It also protects us from chemicals, right? So it provides a mechanical barrier to protect the deeper, more sensitive tissues from chemicals. And UV radiation, so radiation that is emitted by the sun or even by tanning beds. Our skin serves to protect our internal structures from these things, so that physical mechanical barrier. But it also protects us, as I mentioned, from bacteria and viruses by participating in the immune response. So the skin contains immune cells that help to identify and respond to potential threats before they enter the body. The skin is also involved in the immune response because white blood cells are able to migrate through tissues, through the skin and through specific regions of the skin to be able to fight off any foreign pathogens that enter the body, perhaps through a skin wound or a cut, and prevent them from causing a deeper, more systemic infection. The skin provides or performs excretory functions. So for excretion and secretion, so sweat glands help with removing fluid, water, of course, as we sweat mainly contains water, but it also helps with removing small amounts of waste products, such as urea. So urea is a component of urine. It's released from our body through the urine, and it is a metabolic waste product, urea. So sweat also contains trace amounts of urea. So it's removing metabolic waste from the body. Not only do our kidneys remove these waste and toxins from the body, but sweat and the sweat glands also act to do so as well. Another excretory function of the skin occurs through our oil glands. Oil glands secrete what's called sebum, the oily substance that keeps the skin and hair soft and prevents drying out. Sensation. So the skin contains sensory receptors that allow us to detect touch. It has deeper receptors to detect pressure, also sensory receptors to detect pain and temperature. So this sensory information helps protect us from injury and also lets us interact with our environment, right? To be able to feel specific surfaces, to be able to detect some harmful stimuli such as sharp objects or extreme heat. And finally, temperature regulation. So the integumentary system helps regulate body temperature in many ways, some of which include what we've already talked about, sweat production, and also blood flow in the skin. So regulating vasoconstriction, or the constricting of blood vessels, to divert blood away from the skin and keep our core temperature higher or warmer. Or we can promote what's called vasodilation, or the dilation of blood vessels at the surface of the skin. As I've mentioned before, blood is a large reservoir, if you will, for heat in the body. And so blood vessel dilation at the surface of the skin promotes heat release. And that's why when we are exercising or on a very hot day, we often appear flushed or our skin appears red. This is a mechanism of removing heat from the body. And something else I will add in light of mentioning and talking about the sun and heat, when the skin is exposed to ultraviolet light from the sun, so UV radiation, it is able to synthesize vitamin D. It uses a derivative of cholesterol that eventually gets converted into vitamin D. So the skin is a producer of vitamin D. Vitamin D, as we know, is essential for calcium absorption and also bone health. So there's this tie between the integumentary system and the musculoskeletal system, specifically with our bones, which is a quite interesting connection between these two systems. And I always like to reiterate and stress the importance of connecting systems in the body to paint the whole picture of what our bodies are able to accomplish and the physiological roles of each system. These roles are not independent. They're very interlinked, and systems communicate with one another to perform the functions that our body can do. So one of my favorite features of physiology is this connection between systems. And in the winter, actually, our vitamin D levels tend to be lower for this reason, because the sun promotes vitamin D synthesis in our cells. Okay, so let's look at these 4 photos here. As I mentioned, this integumentary system acts as a physical barrier, protecting us from injury, including injury that is conferred from sun radiation. Radiation can damage the skin and cause inflammation. It can cause damage to hair follicles. It can cause burns that progress to the deeper layers of the skin. And radiation also causes cellular changes or mutations in our skin cells. And this can lead to the presence of moles, and in severe cases, it can lead to skin cancer because radiation actually alters our DNA and it alters the DNA within our cells that leads to mutations. Now, B and C are involved in homeostatic processes in our body and mechanisms of regulating body temperature. So here we have evaporation, and recall that homeostasis includes mechanisms that our body performs to maintain an internal stable set point. So evaporation is the physical process where a liquid, such as water, transforms into a gas, water vapor, at the surface. So it's a critical component of the water cycle, and it's driven by heat energy, usually from the sun. So say we're out in the sun or even exercising, and our body temperature is rising. As we get hotter, we sweat. Sweat is produced by sweat glands, and we can see the liquid on the surface of the skin. As this liquid evaporates, this act of evaporating serves to cool us down. Sweat cools you because evaporation takes heat away. So sweat evaporates, it uses heat energy from your skin to remove that heat, and therefore your skin cools down, which helps to lower our body temperature. Next, we have convection. So convection can be involved in maintaining stable body temperature to help us remove heat if we are too warm. So we can see this lion here basking in the sun. We see a nice breeze on this lion. So convection cools your skin because heat that is immediately surrounding your body can be moved away with air or water. So basically your skin feels warm when your skin feels warm to the touch, or even the surrounding environment around you becomes warm, and the warmth from your body emits into that surrounding area around you. So basically your skin warms the air that is surrounding it or touching it to your body temperature. So if we are in our warm bed and this small environment around us is nice and warm to match our body temperature, then when we leave our bed, we detect that it is colder because now the air surrounding us is no longer as close to our body temperature as it was before when we were in bed. But we see here when the wind blows, and we can see with this lion's mane, that warm air that was surrounding you, matching your body temperature, is now replaced with cooler air. Similarly, imagine if you're in a pool and you're constantly having water flow around you, and if that water's cooler than your body temperature, heat will keep leaving your body to warm the water around you. This is convection. So convection helps remove excess heat from the body when we are too warm. And a cool breeze, for example, jumping into a pool, this changes that environment around us of warm air to help cool us down. Conduction is a little bit different from convection. So convection refers to that immediate kind of space around us that becomes warm and matches our body temperature because we're releasing heat. Conduction is heat transfer through direct contact or touch. So as we just saw, heat always moves from warmer to cooler objects. Here we have a hand holding a hot beverage, and if it's a cool day, then holding this hot object in our cooler hands will help to warm up our hands, right? Because heat is being transferred from the beverage to the person's hand. This is also why if you're really hot and someone else is cold and you held hands, for example, their hand will warm up. So this act of conduction is about heat lost or gained through touch. So these mechanisms really serve as ways that, or are involved in ways that we regulate our body temperature and are suggestive of the homeostatic mechanisms that our skin is able to perform, or that our skin facilitates, I should say. Now, this photo I think is really interesting. For a little bit of backstory on this, as I mentioned, our skin provides protection from the outside and environment, protecting our organs, internal, more sensitive tissues from damage. The skin is built for this because the outer layer of our skin is tough, and we will explain why shortly. By protecting our internal environment, we prevent microorganisms like bacteria, viruses, fungi from entering our system. Therefore, our skin houses millions of microbes, millions of microorganisms like bacteria, viruses, so forth. And all of the microbes that live on our skin, and in our body for that matter, in our digestive tract, are referred to as our own microbiome. Our microbiome is the population of bacteria and viruses and fungi that call our bodies home. Now, this particular image is a portrait sculpture created by a British artist named Melissa Fisher. And so what she does is, the material of this sculpture is agar, which is rich in nutrients. So agar is a substance that is rich in nutrients to support life, essentially. This is the same material that scientists use to grow bacteria in the lab. Using a swab, she then transfers her own facial microbes to this sculpture. So this is giving a representation of the microorganisms that are on the surface of her body, specifically on her face. And all of us have these microorganisms, and they're beneficial in many ways. So having a balance of the microorganisms that are within our gut and also on the surface of our skin helps to support healthy cellular function. So it's a symbiotic relationship, if you will. Now, sometimes an overgrowth of negative bacteria or bacteria that we don't want accumulating on our skin can occur, and this can cause an infection. But we also have so many microbes that do not pose a real hazard to our skin. It's just a symbiotic relationship. The skin tells a story. Now, one important thing to understand about the integumentary system is that the skin often reflects what's happening inside the body. So first is that the skin reflects disease processes. Many internal diseases show visible signs on the skin. Changes in color, texture, the presence of rashes or lesions or sores can indicate underlying conditions, such as infections within the body. Autoimmune disorders, such as psoriatic arthritis, are associated with changes to the skin and nails. Liver disease causes yellowing or jaundice of the skin. So because of this, the skin can provide very important diagnostic clues. Second is drug reactions. So medications can cause allergic reactions with hives and itching, swelling, but also discoloration. So many medications, such as chemotherapy drugs, for example, are medications that can cause severe discoloration or patches on the skin, as well as rashes. So not necessarily allergic reactions, but discoloration of the skin or changes in skin texture can be a sign of medication-related issues. Third, the skin responds to chronic irritation. So when the skin is repeatedly irritated, whether it's friction, chemicals, it will begin to adapt. And one of the most common ways that we see this, so imagine when you go to the gym, and if an individual is repeatedly using barbells, and eventually they start to develop these hard pads on their hands and on the skin, and these are called calluses. So chronic use of the skin and often chronic inflammation, so pressure on the skin or rubbing, can lead to thickening of the skin or callus formation. These changes are the body's attempt to protect itself, right? So thickening of the skin will help to protect the skin from deeper damage to it. And finally, the skin mirrors your stress level. So stress hormones and stress in general affects the skin and also affects our immune system. Stress is associated with a slightly weakened immune system. And so this can trigger or worsen skin conditions like acne, which are very hormone sensitive. Acne is a very hormone sensitive skin condition. Eczema, even psoriasis, we'll talk about those two in a little bit. Increased stress can also increase just general inflammation in the body, making skin changes more noticeable. So overall, key takeaway here is that the skin is not just this protective barrier. It really acts as a window into internal health in multiple ways that we discussed. Now let's look at the structures of the skin. We'll look a little bit at the anatomy and some terms that are associated with this. We've seen a lot of these medical terms, but now we're applying them in context, which is a really great aspect of the remainder of this course. So we are applying to all those terms that we've talked about in context and also talking more about pathologies related to them. We'll start with the layers of the skin, starting at the most superficial layer, the epidermis. The epidermis is the outermost layer of the skin. We've seen epi many times, meaning upon, on top of, above. Phil means surface, and eol means pertaining to. So pertaining to, on top of the surface, because the epidermis is the top layer of the skin. This is the layer what we see when we look at our body, and it acts as a very protective barrier that is tough. It does not contain blood vessels, which means that blood does not flow directly through this layer. In fact, the epidermis is quite literally made of dead skin cells, especially the top layer. The top layer of the epidermis is made of dead skin cells that are flattened and stacked on top of each other. And we'll talk more about the epidermis in the upcoming slides and how these cells behave or how they come to be. Below the epidermis, which includes this top dead layer shown here, and then up into this darker pink kind of squiggly line, below is the dermis. So this region here is the dermis. The dermis is made of connective tissue. So not epithelial cells like in the epidermis, but the dermis is largely made of connective tissue. And this gives the skin its strength, structure, as well as elasticity. So elasticity meaning that the skin can stretch and then return to its normal shape. The dermis contains blood vessels. We can see here some blood vessels running up from the hypodermis, also known as the subcutaneous layer. The blood vessels come up and infiltrate the dermis. It also contains nerves. So we see some nerve endings here in yellow that are coming up to the epidermis to allow us to feel sensations. Some pressure receptors here that are associated with nerves to be able to sense deep pressure. And also glands. Here we see a sweat gland, which is connected to a pore to release sweat to the surface of the skin. And we also can see sebaceous glands. Sebaceous glands are the oil glands that are associated with hair follicles. And we'll talk more about all of those glands on a later slide. But these are the general structures of the skin. As a whole, skin consists of stratified squamous epithelial tissue. Now, stratified, because it is many layers. Strata is referring to layers. Squamous refers to the shape of the cells because the cells are oval shaped. And epithelial tissue because it falls under the category of epithelium. Now, oxygen and nutrients also diffuse into the lower epidermis from the richly nourished dermis. So here in the dermis, it has significant nourishment of blood vessels, and that blood is going to transport nutrients, oxygen, to our epidermis because our epidermis does not have its own blood supply. So let's go over the epidermis in a little bit more detail, and especially the structures, or each individual layer, if you will. So the epidermis is made up of 5 cell layers that really perform unique functions to one another as we go from the superficial layer up here to deeper into the epidermis. And here in this dark corally pinky orange is the dermis. So we can see the 5 layers of the epidermis here. And again, each has its own particular role. So let's go through each. We're going to start at the bottom. So we're starting at this basement layer of the epidermis called the stratum basale. So the stratum basale is a region of mitotically active stem cells. So these cells are continuously dividing by mitosis. As new cells are formed, older cells get pushed upwards through the upper layers, up to finally the stratum corneum, but in between there's many cellular changes that happen. So we can see how dynamic our epidermis is, and it's constantly getting replenished. Dead cells are sloughed off from the top layer, and it is continuously replaced. And that originates from the stratum basale. So again, these are mitotically active stem cells. Cells in the epidermis are mainly what we call keratinocytes. These keratinocytes are produced here in the stratum basale. This is where keratinization happens. This is the process by which keratinocytes fill with the tough protein called keratin. Keratin is a fibrous structural protein, so it gives strength, protection, and also waterproofing. So it provides the water repelling feature that our skin has. It is also the major protein that's found in our hair, in our nails, and in the epidermis. So keratin is a fibrous, tough protein that is found in hair, nails, and the upper layer of the epidermis as it migrates upward. As the keratinocytes move toward the surface, the cells flatten. So we can see they're getting flatter and flatter as they migrate upwards. They also lose their nuclei, so we can see these cells have a nucleus. These ones don't at the top layer because they're dead cells. They eventually die, but they remain here for some time in the stratum corneum, packed with keratin. Now, those keratinocytes made in the stratum basale will move upward, and the layer above is called the stratum spinosum. As keratinocytes are pushed upward and they enter the stratum spinosum, this layer appears spiny under a microscope. So that's where the word spinosum is, or what it's referring to. The cells here are connected by what's called desmosomes. Desmosomes are junctions or connections that anchor cells within a layer to one another. And they appear as spikes. You can see these little red spiky lines coming off of the cells. Those are desmosomes that are anchoring neighboring cells to one another. This provides strength. These junctions, connections between the cells provide strength to this layer. And this is what helps the skin to resist extreme stretch and also shearing forces. This layer is also where keratinocytes are not fully dead yet, but they begin producing larger amounts of keratin here. As we move upward, we reach the stratum granulosum. Now the cells begin to die, undergoing programmed cell death. Do you remember what the term for programmed cell death is? If we think back to when we talked about cancer and mitosis, that term is apoptosis. Apoptosis is programmed cell death, when a cell intentionally dies off. The stratum granulosum is where keratinization becomes very obvious. So we have further keratin production and maturation, and the cells begin to die off because they mainly consist of keratin. So the nucleus and organelles are no longer present, mainly just keratin. And where stratum granulosum gets its name is that the cells appear granular. So this grainy appearance refers to the granules that exist within the cells here. And those granules serve the function of releasing lipids that provide the waterproofing aspect of our skin. So lipids repel water, right? Like dissolves like, and lipids are hydrophobic, so they contribute to the water repelling nature of our skin. Now we move up to the stratum lucidum. Now the interesting thing about this layer is that it is only present in thick skin. Specifically, it is only present mainly in our palms, so of our hands, and on the soles of our feet. That's because these surfaces experience a lot of friction from walking. Our hands experience friction from lifting, pulling, grabbing things. And so This layer is only present there. Lucidum refers to clear, transparent, vivid, right? Shiny. Cells in this layer are dead, and they're packed with a precursor to keratin. So keratin has not fully formed throughout these cells yet, but they provide extra protection against friction. So that's why this cell layer is only present in thick skin. Now, finally, we've reached the top layer, the most superficial layer of the epidermis, which is the stratum corneum. The stratum corneum comes from Latin and literally means horn-like. In medical terminology, it refers to something hard, tough, in this case, keratinized, similar to materials that make up animal horns, right? So now those keratinocytes have completely died off. So there's no nuclei, no organelles. These cells are just packed with keratin, providing a lot of strength, protection, and waterproofing to the epithelial cells in the top layer of the skin. Now, this layer functions as this durable protective barrier, and it's continuously shed off. We can see in this photo how these cells are shedding, and if you rub your arm or if you rub your skin really quickly in certain lighting, you can see the cells kind of sloughing off, actually. You can see the little dander that is produced, if you will. So this process of shedding off of skin is called desquamation. De meaning away or off. Squama means scale. So desquamation is literally translating to the shedding of scales. Now, dander refers to the dead sloughing off of the stratum corneum. As I mentioned, you're sloughing off this layer of cells. And this is different from dandruff. So dandruff refers to clumped dander that is held together by oils that the skin produces. So clumps of dander or dead skin cells held together by oil is dandruff. This is that outermost layer, and desquamation refers to the removing of the most superficial portion of this outer layer of the skin. So overall, keratin synthesis progresses from beginning and more minimal production in the stratum basale, and it continues once we reach the outer layer where these cells are packed with keratin and completely dead cells. A little practice activity that I've inserted here is to practice arranging the layers of the epidermis. So identifying the correct ordering of these layers, because each layer has its own specific function, as we saw. So I'd like you to, again, the emphasis is to move away from memorization and more towards understanding. And the way that we can do that is by comparing or matching structures to their function. What do they actually do? And that gives us an indication of the context or of the meaning behind these terms, right? Instead of just memorizing them based on their name. So I encourage you to review the previous slides, arrange these layers in their correct order, and then also things like mnemonics can help with remembering the orders just to make recall a bit easier. But the key here to understanding is, again, connecting these terms to their function. So I also encourage you to watch this video. I won't play it in this particular lesson right now, but this video is a nice sketch that summarizes the layers of the epidermis that were just discussed. And I believe it goes into the dermis as well. If you'd like an alternate explanation of these, it's a really interesting video, so I encourage you to pause and watch that. But let's move on to the deeper layers of the integumentary system. And we will talk about the dermis. So the dermis is really considered the core, if you will, of the integumentary system. We know that derma is or dermo is a combining form for skin. And derm, meaning skin, another term is also cutane, right? Cutane also refers to skin. The dermis specifically is made of connective tissue, mainly collagen and elastin. And collagen and elastin give skin strength, and flexibility. So collagen provides strength, elastin provides flexibility to the skin. The dermis lies beneath and supports the epidermis. This is because it contains that blood supply. It also has vessels of the lymphatic system, bringing lymphatic fluid, which contains a lot of immune cells. It also contains nerve endings for sensation and accessory structures, such as sweat glands, oil glands, and hair follicles. So the dermis plays a very big role in that thermoregulatory process of the integumentary system, because blood vessels in the skin, as I mentioned, can dilate to release heat or narrow to conserve heat. Our sweat glands can produce sweat that cools the skin as it evaporates. So we have a lot of thermoregulatory processes here. This layer also allows for sensations, as I mentioned, like touch, deep pressure, pain, due to the many nerve endings. These nerve endings are sensory receptors. And we can see here below the dermis is the hypodermis. Hypo means below, and dermis, so it's below the skin, so pertaining to below the skin. The hypodermis is technically not one of the layers of the skin. That's why it's called the layer that's below the skin. The hypodermis is also referred to as the subcutaneous layer, right? Sub, below, cutaneous, skin. And it's a fatty layer that is found below the skin, between the skin and the muscle that is below that. So this is where subcutaneous needles, for example, are administered for medications. Now, if we look at the dermis a little bit closer, and this is a microscope image, we can see this top layer of cells is our epidermis. We see there's no nuclei. The cells are dead cells that are filled with keratin. The dermis can be subdivided into the papillary layer. This anchors the epidermis and also supports nutrient delivery to the epidermis. So we know our dermis has capillaries in it, and this papillary layer allows for nutrients from the blood to be brought to the epidermis, which has no blood supply of its own. It's again made of that loose connective tissue, has collagen and elastin proteins. There's also the reticular layer. Reticular comes from Latin reticulum, which means network. The reticular layer provides mechanical strength and forms the major supportive framework of the skin. So it's the deeper, thicker portion of the dermis. There's also blood vessels, sensory receptors, but it provides a lot of structural support because the fibers here are irregularly organized into this network. So it provides strength in all directions when we see reticular tissue. Now let's talk more about the accessory structures. So we mentioned the sweat glands. These are also referred to as sudoriferous glands. Sudoriferous just means sweat producing. So they produce sweat to cool the body. The sebaceous glands, or oil glands, are associated with hair follicles. So many of these glands are found near hair follicles. And they help to lubricate and waterproof the skin as well as hair because they produce oil, which is a fatty substance. So they generate and excrete sebum. Sebum is that mixture of lipids like in oil. Now, we see the hair follicle here associated with that sebaceous gland. A hair follicle anchors the hair in the skin and is responsible also for hair growth and maintenance. So in the hair bulb area that we see at the bottom here, this is the enlarged base region of the hair follicle, and it contains actively dividing cells that produce the hair, as well as a small blood supply here. So associated again with this hair follicle is that sebaceous gland to lubricate the hair, and also these muscles, and they're called erector pili muscles. Erector pili muscles cause hair to stand up on end, or when we have goosebumps. This is evolutionarily involved in a thermostatic process as well. And so as a thermoregulatory method of standing hair up on end with animals, such as if you think of a cat, for example, when they sense a threat, they kind of puff up as their hair all stands up on end. And this is associated with a protective or thermoregulatory effect. And we observe it's less relevant in humans for warmth, but hair standing up on end is caused by these erector pili muscles. And finally, nails have the combining form onycho. Nails are hard structures that are made of keratin. As I mentioned, keratin makes up hair, nails, and it's on the surface of the skin. And in this case, the keratin is this hard surface that protects the tips of our fingers and toes. They grow from a specialized area of skin called the nail matrix, and that's located at the base of the nail here. As cells in the matrix divide and they fill with keratin, they harden and push forward to form the actual nail itself, the nail plate, which is the visible part. So under the nail plate is the nail bed, which is below, but a structure here, the lanula, is that pale half-moon shape. And this represents the visible portion of the nail matrix. So the nail matrix extends down below, if you will, the cuticle and below the skin here. And this shows a portion, the lanula shows a portion of the nail matrix that's emerging to become the visible part of the nail. The cuticle helps to seal that space between the skin and the nail to protect it. So nails, again, their main function is protection for our fingers and toes, also improving the ability to grasp and pick up small objects. So an evolutionarily evolved role here. So now we are going to move on to skin color. Skin color is influenced by a combination of genes, also physiology, so the function of certain skin cells, and sometimes it's associated with or influenced by pathology too. So skin color is primarily determined by the amount of melanin in the skin of an individual. Melanin is a pigment that is produced by cells that exist in the skin called melanocytes. So here we see melanocytes present in the skin. And melanocytes contain melanin. Genes control both the number of melanocytes that an individual has, but the main determinant of skin color and differences in skin color between individuals is the amount of melanin that a person's melanocytes produce. So some individuals may have the same number of melanocytes being melanin, cyte is cell. So the melanocytes are the type of cell that produce melanin. So two individuals might have the same number of melanocytes, but there may be differences in how much melanin their cells are producing. And that will change and determine whether their skin is lighter or darker. Natural variations exist in certain genes between individuals that result in the different natural skin tones among a population. But there are some environmental factors that influence the amount of melanin in our skin cells. Specifically, sun exposure stimulates melanocytes to make more melanin. And this is what we see when we have a tan, the darkening of the skin. This is because the sun or the UV rays are stimulating melanocytes to produce more melanin. So tanning increases melanin, and melanin does act as a natural protector against UV radiation. But any form of tan is an unhealthy tan and is a sign of skin damage. And so this type of sun exposure stimulating melanocytes has negative consequences. And one of those is the formation of moles that may become cancerous. And we'll talk about that shortly. So that was a nice segue to stay tuned for part 2.